All right, so welcome back to the channel, this tactical intellectual channel. The topic of discussion will be the Iberian Peninsula. We're going to discuss Spain, Portugal, and everything in between, those minor Iberian kingdoms that popped up outside of Spain and Portugal. So we're going to speak on the original people, the original civilization, the original commerce, families, and so on and so forth. Everything that had to do with that civilization and culture of the Iberian Peninsula. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So as you see the slide here of Iberia, these are the sources shaping my opinions regarding the original peoples, the original inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula. So I'm going to draw from the books Racial History of Man, The Races of Europe, Environment, Race, and Migration, Riddles of Prehistoric Times, Sex and Race, Volume 1, and maybe a couple more sources. I'm going to start off with the book Sex and Race, Volume 1. I'm going to read some important parts, and then I'll give my thoughts and ideas on what I just read, and then move on to the next and do the same. So that takes us to the book Sex and Race, Volume 1. We're going to read chapter 15, Miscegenation in Spain, Portugal, and Italy. That's the name of that chapter, but we're going to read just a portion dealing with Spain and Portugal, of course. And it reads, Southern Spain and Portugal are in reality Negroid lands. They are only geographically European. Drop down a little bit. The oldest skulls found in the peninsula are Negroid. This is especially true of one of Mujam or Mugan, Portugal, which is one of the earliest of the present human types yet discovered. Other Negro peoples have come in since that distant time, but the original Negro type persists. As G. Young says, it is easy to recognize not only the imported Negro type, but also a type generally confused with him, the Aboriginal Negroid Iberian. Later, we know not how there arose in Spain a mixed blood people, which, as Vicuna says, was almost Negro with grizzly hair. These are very probably the Celtiberians or Black Celts who took civilization, such as it then existed in the West, to Britain and were found there by Julius Caesar or Caesar. Tacitus describes them as swarthy with curly hair. Alright, so there you have it. Pay attention to the language being used. They say in reality, Negroid lands. Then the oldest skulls found in the peninsula are Negroid. Then it says that other Negro peoples have come in. Okay, so you get the gist of the message I'm trying to convey. It's from this source here. Now, that's not the only source. We're going to have some that verify and back up what's being said here. And we're going to go into the book Racial History of Man by Roland Dixon. And let's look at the origins. Today we find the skeletal remains, but let's see, those skeletal remains belong to what type of people. So this is the portion where we turn to the source Racial History of Man by Roland Dixon. We're going to do a combination of reading and skimming. So as you can see on page 151, it's saying or showing the part the Iberian Peninsula. So we're going to go to page 152 and we're going to check out the highlighted portion down there, and it says, alright, in comparison with France, the Iberian Peninsula is as yet very poor in any cranial remains dating to the Paleolithic period. Only a single skull, the now famous but long neglected Gibraltar skull, has yet been found within the area. In type, this skull, which dates from early Paleolithic times, appears to be a blend between the Proto-Australoid and Mongoloid types. As in France, the Mediterranean type seems to have been the most important. Although there is evidence of the considerable strength of the Proto-Negroid factor, which, as will be seen, still survives in remote districts among the living population. Let's drop down a little bit. The weakness of the Mediterranean and the strength of the Caspian type would appear to imply a rather radical change, which may be accounted for in several ways, since the latter type was not, so far as we can tell, present in the peninsula in any force in Neolithic times. It must have come in either from France in the north or from Africa in the south, unless, as seems rather unlikely, it came by sea. So 154 highlighted portion reads, there is, however, much greater probability in the suggestion of an African source, as will be shown in a later chapter devoted to Northern Africa. The Caspian type was almost certainly strongly represented in the region north of the Sahara at this time, and its presence on the coast of Grenada would thus be the result of a spread from Morocco along the peninsula's southern shore. It is a theory strongly championed that the Mediterranean type spread into Spain from Africa. A much later historical movement in the same direction was that of the Arabs and Saracens, so that there would seem to be justification for some such proto-Berber drift. 155 down below the highlighted portion reads, the South, on the other hand, would seem to have been relatively little affected. Its turn came with the Mohammedan conquests of the 8th century and the several centuries of Saracen rule. During this period, we have the coming Arabs, Berbers, and other North African peoples in considerable numbers, with the result that further increments of long-headed types were added to the population. These were probably in the main Mediterranean and Caspian, with something of the Proto-Negroid type. So let's drop down. In northern Portugal, however, in the provinces of Iberia, Alta, and Tras os Montes, there is a strong factor of the Caspian type, which yields in the more rugged and mountainous sections to the Proto-Negroid and Proto-Australoid types. So if you speak Portuguese, my apologies. That's not my strong suit, so I know I butchered it. So let's go ahead and go to page 157, the highlighted portion, and it reads, in pigmentation, the peoples of the Iberian Peninsula are prevailingly and, as a rule, strongly brunette. Blonde types seem to occur in noticeable proportion, chiefly in the northwest. Here, especially in the shore population, a considerable number of tall, blonde, or blondish individuals occur, the proportion rising in the case of the fishing population of the northern coast of the Portuguese province of Minho to as high as 70%. Drop down a little bit. The old Mediterranean type of medium or under medium stature and brunette character dominate in Neolithic times. Apparently throughout most of the peninsula still forms the underlying stratum of the people, except in the Cantabrian region, the northern Portuguese coast, and in the extreme south. The Proto-Negroid and the Proto-Australoid factors, which were strong in Neolithic times and earlier, have apparently been driven back into the more isolated mountain districts of northeastern Portugal, of Murcia and Valencia, and of the Pyrenees. In comparison with France, the Iberian Peninsula has received far greater influences from Africa, while the barrier of the Pyrenees has in considerable measure protected it from the floods of Palealpine and Alpine peoples, which from Neolithic times onward have poured into France. In tracing early history of the region, mention has been made of the Basque, that small group of peculiar people at the western end of the Pyrenees who in the 6th century or thereabouts spread across the mountains into the edge of southwestern France, so that at present they are found on both sides of the political frontier. Some, like Collignon, have declared the Basque to constitute a definite race. Others, such as Aranzadi, himself a Basque, regard them as a mixed type. Page 159, the highlighted portion reads, the other series from Zaros on the coast just west of San Sebastian differs from the first in that the males show a greatly reduced proportion of the Mediterranean and Ural types and an increase in the Alpine, together with the presence of small factors of the Caspian and Proto-Negroid, which were not represented before. The females, on the other hand, have the Mediterranean as the chief factor, and the Ural type, although only in the minority, is nevertheless 3 times as important as in the male crania. 160, highlighted portion reads, if this is true, we should have to regard the modern Basque as the result of the mixture of a people predominantly of the Ural type with one in whom the Mediterranean element was of primary importance. The latter requirement is met, it would seem, by the fundamental stratum of the Spanish populations. To summarize what we just read, on page 152, we have the time period, Paleolithic period. Now, the nature of the skull that was found is of that mixed type. Of what type, you may ask? Well, Proto-Australoid and Mongoloid. Moving on to page 153, we see that the Mediterranean type and the Proto-Negro types, they had populations in Portugal, and the time period is the Neolithic times. So page 154, it speaks of the African element, the original North African element at that. So 156, the Australoids, the Proto-Negroes, they're present in Portugal, as well as the Caspian type. Okay, so 157, we see that today the modern population in present times, of the Iberian Peninsula is made up of white people with dark hair. They use the term brunette. Then it goes back to the Neolithic time antecedents, and it describes them. They had brunette character or complexion. So which one comes first, the chicken or the egg? The cart or the horse or the cart? Hey, this is logic here, being reasonable. So let's go on to 157 and 158. And again, it mentions the Australoid and Negro influences of the Iberian Peninsula. This time, adding that the Iberian Peninsula received a far greater amount of influence from Africa in the time period from the Neolithic times onward. So as you see, the rest of this, it just brings out the Basque people, and it mentions how the type of tribe they are. They're a very mixed people. Now, I don't want to get too deep on the Basque people. I'm probably going to do something. Well, no, I'm not probably. I am going to do something later on, because they have a very interesting history, and I definitely think that their story should be told the correct way. So again, they touch on Spain, France, and parts of Portugal. So I'm definitely going to have something in the works regarding the Basque people. So let's go to the book Environment, Race, and Migration by Griffith Taylor, and let's look at page 178. 178, the highlighted portion reads, all around the western margin are the very narrow-headed Mediterranean folk. These form the lowest stratum, and it still persists in Portugal and upland Spain, and forms an element in the coastal population of all the Mediterranean. Next comes the Nordic zone, most prominent around the Baltic and North Seas. The great central wedge of Alpine peoples is connected with the central peoples of Asia, though the common practice of separating Europe from Asia has hidden the close continuity. The main body of Alpine peoples are of moderate stature, rather dark with brown or black hair. They constitute the South Germans, Austrians, Now, the point of all of that is just to show you the racial makeup of that area. So for Spain and Portugal, very interesting history. We're gonna go into many source materials like J.A. Rogers, Nature Knows No Color Line, because this presentation that I did here on the Iberian Peninsula, that is to solidify and certify that the ancient skeletal remains that were found, they belong to a certain type of people. It's not the people that currently live here. They came at a later date. So we're gonna utilize information from a 3-volume source that I have called The Image of the Black in Western Art. The information and imagery that pertains to all of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, we're gonna use that. And then we're gonna look at Tansy Ward's book called Hidden Legacies, African Presence in European Antiques. And we're gonna check out the videos and literary works from Dr. Maria Charles, book and magazine form, and gonna let her explain it because she gives very thorough explanations in the videos that I will show clips of. And there's so much information when it comes to the Iberian Peninsula, and hey, you guys deserve to hear it. So that's the conclusion of this video presentation. This is only part 1. Part 2 is in the works. So thanks for listening. Catch you guys later.